This is a review of the variety called African Pride. It's an Atemoya. So what I have here is two strains of the African Pride. I've had this variety for 15 years or more. So I had it for quite some time. So what I believe what this might be nowadays referred to is African Pride 1, a smaller fruit. This fruit's about 1.5 pounds. And African Pride 2, which does produce a larger fruit. It will produce smaller fruits if you don't thin them, and depending on the age of your tree and how much fruits that you have. But the fruits on this African Pride 2 can get to like 3.5 pounds. I mean, I had some of my largest has been 3.5 pounds, but mostly it doesn't get that big. Mostly, you get quite a few that could be like a 3-pound fruit. This one itself is a 3-pound fruit right here. So this one's a 3-pounder. Now, I had this variety for quite some time. So back in the days, then there wasn't that many varieties as we have now. So weren't as lucky back then to have all the various varieties that you see these days in Southern California. But from my recollection of what African Pride was, it is a variety from Australia, but it is one that, from my kind of recollection, people grew it, and especially information out of Florida, the Florida growers, and pictures and so forth. It was a very large fruits. They produce very large fruits, like 3 to 4 pound fruits at times. So these days, I think, if I was to kind of assume, I think that the AP2 would be the real African Pride. So I think there's some kind of, just guessing, there might be a bit of mislabeling kind of going on out there with African Pride. But AP2, which is the larger fruit, is most likely probably the real African Pride. And the smaller one that is kind of known as AP1, it could be a seedling, or it could just be something else. A wild guess is it could be like the Hawaiian pink mammoth. So, and that's another story. That's the Hawaiian pink mammoth is different than the real authentic Australian pink mammoth. So that's just a wild guess. It could even be that, just from my recollection of the shape of the fruits. But again, I had this variety for quite some time. So, I mean, even when I had it, it could have just been mislabeled, and what I have here might not even be what is referred to in the community as African Pride 1 and 2. Who knows? I'm just kind of basing this off of what my experience been. So both of these fruits came from the same tree, the same rootstock, but when I grafted the branches, the sources came from different sources. So one of the major branch of this produces much larger fruits like this, and the other one produces smaller fruits. And I could see why there might be a confusion out there, just because these two fruits do look quite a bit alike, except for the size. If this was like, because this AP2 does produce smaller fruits most of the time. It really kind of depends on the age of the tree and how much thinning you do. And they have quite a bit of the same kind of features. If you look at the shoulder here, usually there's lots of these bumps and protuberances, like these nipples come out. And then when you go further kind of down onto the fruit, it gets kind of more indented, like this. Similar to the AP1, kind of a lot of these kind of nipples and protrusion on the shoulder. And then when you go further down into the bottom of the fruit, it's more like this indentation, kind of like you stuck your thumb in there. One thing about my AP2 is that it does produce what I would say lighter colored fruits when it's ripe. So when it's ripe, the skin does get paler, like kind of all around, and sometimes even has a kind of almost like a yellowish color to it. While this AP1, you get a lot of that yellowing on the shoulders, but then there's a lot of splotches of green around the fruit. The other major thing is that lots of my AP2, it tends to have this really kind of like this beak towards the end tip of the fruit. And it doesn't show up on all the fruits, but it shows up on quite a few fruits, like this little beak that shows up. Sometimes this beak could even be bigger. That shows up quite a bit. While the AP1 doesn't really have that. I've never seen one on it. It's usually pretty kind of flat. But the same kind of look, it shows up on this too. But while this does, lots of time occasionally put out this kind of beak protrusion at the tip of the fruit, this one never does. And the other thing with this is like this could get very, very yellow, like this. But if you were to feel it, lots of the ripe Atemoyas, when they get ripened, it goes from this smooth kind of texture to almost like a tacky texture. I would describe it almost like if sugar was kind of built up on the skin and you feel it, there's like a tackiness to it. It's one of the signs of a very ripe fruit. And AP1 does this much earlier. Like you could feel it, like in terms of being this tackiness on it. The AP2, it eventually does build that, but even at this color stage where it's like so light yellow, that still hasn't really quite built up on it. Okay, and again, I am calling this AP1 and I'm calling this AP2. But like I said, I mean, I've had this variety for such a long time, before there was even a distinguishment of that in the community. And I could be completely wrong. What I have might not even be African pride. It could just be something else. Who knows? So that's just a look at the fruit shape of the African pride. Unfortunately, they're still rock hard. They're not ready to be sampled yet or taste tested yet. So probably be another 5 days or so before I'll get a chance to taste test this when it softens up. But that was just a nice kind of review of the fruit when we get to the point of tasting it. So African pride, at least what I know as African pride for myself. So all right, that's an update on this. Stay tuned for the taste review next.